Visit gpfcircle.com to purchase the complete audio package from Rising and Falling Powers, the Geopolitical Futures Conference held in New York City. Again, visit gpfcircle.com to purchase the complete audio package. China's economy seems to either be moving forward, depending on who you're talking to, moving backwards, according to some people, or other people just say it's stagnant. We know that China has a lot of debt issues. At the same time, we have a leader who's running the country that is trying to push things forward in a huge way. You have a lot of insight on this. Where is China's economy at today?
A lot of folks will look at China's economy in a vacuum and not think about it in the broader context of what's going on politically. So yes, as you mentioned, there are a lot of debt issues. I think at the end of 2016, their debt to GDP was 260%. A recent IMF report said it was closer to 310%. That's quite an increase in 2017. Now, you ask maybe, what are they spending all this money on, right? Well, the Chinese government is supporting a lot of their state-owned enterprises for political reasons, to keep people employed, make sure that even as some of these companies become less profitable, as wages rise and their margins are slimmed, they can keep them going. And that costs money. You really only have a couple of ways to create, well, not create money, but to fund these companies is either printing money, which isn't really creating value, or creating new debt.
I'm going to ask you a question about these state-owned enterprises because it's the big one that many people have. Many people view them as their activities in China, that they don't really work. They're not really efficient companies. And yet, these state-owned enterprises are moving into Western markets and buying up real, legitimate Western companies, and obviously taking that know-how back to China. How does that work, and how is that impacting the Chinese economy in real terms?
So there's a couple of goals that the Chinese government has in mind right now as it relates to outside investment. On the one hand, they're trying to restrict capital outflow because, well, for a lot of reasons, they're afraid that if money escapes the country, it's gone, and if they need it in the near term for whatever reason, it won't be there. At the same time, they're actively seeking out new technologies. As you mentioned, they have a lot of active venture capital funds that are trying to seek out all of these enterprises all over the world in order to reincorporate and bring that technology back into China. So whether that's being folded into state-owned enterprises or whether you have standalone funds trying to seek that technology out for later usage, those are both going on. But there's a distinction because those smaller companies that are going to be innovating, creating that technology, you're talking about $5, $10, $50 million investments, but the Chinese government is concerned about regulating $10 billion acquisitions. Those are the ones, at least as it relates specifically to corporate acquisitions, that the government's focused on.
Interesting, okay. So in real terms, is the Chinese economy in good shape right now? What does it look like?
It's not in particularly good shape. There's a lot of debt. That's one aspect of it. And it's very circular. It's like every time you take another step, it ties into something else and it all ties back eventually. But the next step that's related to the debt is the real estate market. Now, China's economy isn't wholly dependent upon real estate, but it is quite dependent on real estate, more so than a lot of Western economies. I think at least as of a couple of years ago, something between 15 to 20% of their GDP was related to real estate activities. And that's just not someone buying a piece of property. It could be a state-owned enterprise creating the steel that's required for the construction materials that actually developers use to build new inventory. So the Chinese government is playing this very delicate game where if real estate prices go up and stay up for too long, they're risking a bubble, and the risk from a bubble is an uncontrolled reversion in prices and a drop that can ricochet because then debt will go bad and banks that had the debt are in trouble and developers that had borrowed that debt in order to build new buildings can't pay it back, so there's a ricochet effect. That's on the one hand, but at the same time, they can't push down real estate prices too much because the economy is dependent on it. So it's a balancing act.
So obviously we know that there's been a lot of Chinese money that's flooded into the real estate markets in North America. There are a lot of question marks about why that's happening and what's behind it. What's your take on that?
So we talk a lot at Geopolitical Futures about these long cycles in China's history, how there will be a devolution and then a unification back and forth, and we can see this happen over the course of hundreds of years. And oftentimes to unify, the Chinese government must close the economy off somewhat to the rest of the world. And this is because what causes that devolution is wealth along the coast is generated because they have access to trade in the rest of the world, and why someone in, like a rich person in Beijing might have more in common with a rich person in New York than someone in the interior of China. But it's very hard to move things into the interior of China, so they don't benefit from that trade. So there's that separation, and we've seen it occur already. Deng's whole, enrich yourself, move away from the policies of Mao, that's what that was about. And now they're at this tipping point again, where Xi Jinping needs to either let things go on as they've been, which it doesn't seem like he's doing after watching his announcement of the Party Congress, or try to find ways to use the money on the coast to prevent the people in the interior from, well, potentially challenging the government. All the peasant revolts have come from the interior previously. So the reason people are sending money over to the real estate markets in Australia, real estate markets in Toronto, and you've seen these local governments create some regulations to try to push that back, it's because people see that coming and they're trying to get their money out now before it's too late.
So the end game here, you already described it, that Xi Jinping, obviously they're very well aware of the issues that they have, and they're trying to address them. Do you feel that he has the tools at his disposal to be able to do it? Because there's a perception, at least in popular opinion in the West, that he does.
That's the big question. And what we're still trying to determine right now is if the new position he's taking after the Party Congress is just rhetoric, or if he actually has some new philosophy. If the philosophy of Deng replaced the philosophy of Mao, is Xi actually going to replace the philosophy that the Chinese political economy has been running off of for the last 40 years? We don't know quite yet. He hasn't published, the equivalent of a little red book that Mao had. But he's been, if he does in fact have those tools, he's been taking every step available to him to prepare to use them. I mean, there's been these really large-scale purges to ensure that everyone around him is loyal. We saw recently that obviously the state-owned enterprises, the state's involved in the management, but that smaller businesses are going to start having more direct involvement from the government as well. So he's at least getting ready to start making some bigger changes. Whether or not he's successful is the big question.
Well, we will be watching to see what happens. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Visit gpfcircle.com to purchase the complete audio package from Rising and Falling Powers, the Geopolitical Futures Conference held in New York City. Again, visit gpfcircle.com to purchase the complete audio package.